It's July 21st, 2024, and I'm with Mr. John J. Jeckovich, World War II veteran, and we're reading his book and talking about the Battle of the Bulge. And Mr. Jeckovich, as a teenager, was in the Battle of the Bulge, got shot up in the shoulder and still a shrapnel in his leg. As a result, every time he goes to a check station in the airport to get a ticket to go through to get on a plane, the alarms go off because there's shrapnel still in his leg. We're going to talk a little bit about your fight in the Battle of the Bulge, but before I begin, what's the passcode?
4209.
All right. Briefly tell us the experience that you had with General Patton during World War II.
General Patton
That's also the experience you had.
picked us out of that stupid, out of that barn and said, "Get the hell out of here, go back, get up to the next checkpoint."
How long were you in the barn for? How long were you in the barn for before Patton showed
That
up?
night?
How long were you there before Patton showed up?
Oh, we were sleeping.
And he came in and said,
Yeah, we were walking all day in the stupid rain.
And what exactly did he say?
He said, "Get your ass up and get the hell out of here, get to the next checkpoint. If I can walk in the damn rain, you can walk in it too."
And so what happened is he waited in the barn to see if you guys all got up and left?
Yeah, well, check. I told Puss, camouflage that Jeep and trailer so nobody sees it, and he did a good job. Patton picked it up.
Patton picked it up.
One of his guys picked it up.
Okay.
I don't think Patton picked it up.
Okay. Patton was a very colorful character during World War II. And it's interesting, he looks a lot older than he was only in his 50s.
Yeah.
He was also in World War I. And he died a very unusual death, and not because he was in battle. It was an accident he had in Europe. But some of the things, some notes I got here on Patton is that Montgomery's massive assault, which would get all the land and air support, Patton had waited for. So what happened is Patton and Montgomery were kind of working hand in hand to see who could get the victory first.
Yeah.
And Montgomery got the massive air assault, which would get all the land and air support, and what Patton was waiting for, but he didn't have. And so Patton said in one of his memoirs, "I really believe this is one of the outstanding operations in history." Patton noted in his diary. The following day, he stalked onto a pontoon bridge, stalked onto a pontoon bridge and started towards the opposite shore. Halfway across the bridge, Patton stopped. Patton said, "I always wanted to piss in the Rhine," he said, and in full view of all his men, he did. Those are some of the things that Patton would do. There were now some 92,000 American prisoners of war housed in more than 50 camps scattered across Germany, all of them presumably equally deserving of liberation. Yet within hours of crossing the Rhine, Patton asked that a full-fledged combat command from his 4th Armored Division, 3,000 men and 50 tanks, prepare immediately to race 40 miles behind the German lines to the town of Hammelburg and rescue a particular group of officers confined in Old Flag 17B. His commanders objected. Their men were exhausted from weeks of combat. German resistance was still fierce. The POWs at Hammelburg would be freed within all others in the course of the overall Allied advance. Patton backed off, but not very far. He ordered a far smaller task to take on the mission. 16 German tanks instead of 50, Patton ordered, and 27 half-tracks that were self-propelled guns, and 307 officers and men were under the command of Captain Abram Baum. Puzzled aides wondered why Patton seemed so intent Why Patton seemed so intent on this objective. He wanted to outdo Douglas MacArthur and told one this raid would make a much publicized rescues of the Americans in the Philippines look like peanuts. So he's trying to get this press, so he's going to try to free all these Americans.
He wanted the glory, yeah.
He loved the glory.
Yeah.
Okay. He told others that he feared that the Germans were about to kill the POWs, but he never told Captain Bond the reason these men were being asked to risk their lives. Patton had learned that his daughter's husband, Patton's daughter's husband, Lieutenant Colonel John Waters, who had been captured 2 years earlier at the Kasserine Pass, was among the officers held at Hammelburg, and the general wanted him freed right away. On the evening of March 26, Baum's task force set off into German-held territory. So now Patton's going to go in German-held territory to try to free these officers who are prisoners of war. One so happens to be his daughter's husband. His daughter's husband. And that was Lieutenant Colonel John Waters. Now the daughter's husband got a big title right away, Lieutenant Colonel.
Oh yeah?
Well,
the daughter?
No, the daughter's husband. Patton's daughter's husband was now being called Lieutenant Colonel.
Yeah, well, that goes on all the time.
On the evening of March 26, Baum's task force set off in Germany-held territory. So now Patton's going to go behind enemy lines to try to save these officers. Tom Galloway of Mobile was a prisoner at Hammelburg. He was a third camp, and he endured since his capture just outside Bastogne. He had been sent first to Stalag 2A north of Berlin, and then imprisoned at Stalag 4, which was in West Prussia, at the approaching Red Army forced its abandonment. American personnel who fell into German hands were treated far better than those unlucky enough. Oh, here's a very good point, and you made this point. American personnel who fell into German hands were treated, these are American prisoners, were treated better by the Germans than the unlucky American soldiers that were captured by the Japanese.
Oh yeah, certainly, yeah.
Japanese treated them horribly.
Yeah, they tortured. Those prisoners were starving. They were starving.
Less than 2% of the American POWs failed to survive German captivity, while over 50% of those captured in the Pacific died.
Yeah.
So if you're captured by the Germans, only 2% Americans died, but if the Americans were captured by the Japanese, 50% died.
Yeah. Well, the Japanese were the ones that attacked us.
German treatment of Soviet prisoners was a different story. Some 5 million Red Army troops were captured over the course of the war. Fewer than 1 million would see its end. But Galloway remembered the treatment he and his fellow prisoners got was bad enough. So if you were a German that captured a Russian, the Red Army soldier, the Germans captured 5 million Russians. And out of the 5 million Russians they captured, only 1 million made it.
Yeah.
They treated the Russians a lot worse than the American soldiers.
Yeah.
On the day Galloway remembers, a skinny, dirty fellow came up to me and said that he heard I was from Mobile. It was Herden Ina. He and I were raised about 8 blocks from each other. Ina was a second lieutenant. He had been captured in the Ardennes, and he shared his fellow Mobile's hatred of the pervasive cold. See, a lot of these guys, Army soldiers fighting in the Battle of Bulge, many of them were from the South.
Yeah.
Mississippi, Louisiana.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Alabama or Eastern War.
Yeah.
You're just cold all the time, he remembered. I went 3 months without ever taking my clothes off. You stayed in your clothes 24 hours a day. You took off your boots and you tie them in your bunk at night because they might get stolen.
Yeah.
The senior American officer of Hammelburg had a small crystal radio set hidden in a bucket. Nightly BBC broadcast reported general progress of the war. By the third week of March, the men knew that the Americans were coming closer. But Galloway remembered, you couldn't get too excited about anything, you're just too hungry. He was attending Mass presided over by a Jesuit priest in one of the barracks. It had taken the Brum Task Force 48 hours to shoot its way to the gates of the prison camp. They had attacked repeatedly and had lost both men and vehicles along the way, now firing on the adjacent camp, which housed Serbian captives whose gray coats the American had evidently mistaken for German uniforms. Lieutenant Colonel Waters was one of the several men who volunteered to go forward and get the Americans to stop shooting. As they advanced and getting to Americans to stop shooting, a trigger-happy German guard shot Waters in the buttocks, tearing away the lower segment of his spinal column. Gravely wounded, he was carried back to the combat, where a Serbian doctor began to tend to his wounds. Patton's son-in-law would not be rescued that day. So Patton's son-in-law was a prisoner there, and after the shooting, one of the German guards shot him in the butt. And
Shot?
yes, a German guard at the prison camp shot Patton's son-in-law, who was a lieutenant colonel, in the butt, and they thought he was going to be broken out of prison that day, but it didn't happen. 2 big Sherman tanks broke through the double barbed wire, trailing the wire and uprooted the fence post. He recalled the pavement on the street cracked under the tank's weight. Did a lot of the streets crack under the tank's weight? Did a lot of the regular streets crack under the tank's weight?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Those trains were heavy.
The prisoners rushed through the opening, cheering and embracing the tankers. Everyone was jubilant. So now Patton's got these tanks busted through the prison gates, where they're still armed by German guards. And so everyone was jubilant over the fact that at last we're going to be getting some food, Galloway remembered. But there were some 1,300 American officers in this one camp, and there was room for no more than 250 on the vehicles. Captain Baum said still had with him. Ada decided to clamber onto the deck of the lead tank with 5 or 6 other men and try to hang on the jerry cans or the gasolines in clusters of 76 millimeter shells stored there as they made it back to American lines. So now Patton has got these bunch of tanks there, but there's 1,300 American officers in this prison camp, and on these tanks that busted through the gate, only 250 can fit out of these tanks, so they'll leave back over 1,000 prisoners. But there's some 1,300 officers in the camp, and there's only room for 250. As I moved on, a cold wind blew in my face, Igna recalled, and it was an exhilarating and wonderful feeling of freedom. We thought we were going to have breakfast the next morning, but it did not happen that way. The Germans were already closing in, within 200 yards. The American columns came up, a heap of logs blocking the way. As the tanks and other vehicles labored to turn around in the narrow road, Ada remembered German Panzer rockets whooshed by. So now the Germans are stopping this prisoner of war camp being broken into. The Germans are sending the Panzers out to stop them. Roman whooshed by me like a deadly Roman candle and exploded in the woods. I felt the heat and clung on for dear life. As soon as we could, we jumped down and ran to less exposed track further back. He stayed with it until dawn, and then when the column came to a halt, the senior officer among the liberated prisoners told them that they were free to continue on with the task force, but he was going to walk the 11 miles back to Hammelburg under a white flag. Ingrid and most of the other prisoners stumbled along in his wake, exhausted their night ride in the cold wind. Within a few minutes they heard an explosion. German infantry and tankers with 90 millimeters were attacking was the left of Baum's task force. Every vehicle was eventually smashed or burned or captured. At least 25 men died, many more wounded. Though those who survived were added to the prisoner roster at Hammelburg. The raid had been a fiasco. So what happened was all those tanks that tried to bust into the prison all got destroyed by the Panzers. And whoever was left went back into the prison. They took them back into the prison.
So it was not successful.
It was a fiasco.
Yeah.
As two American armored columns advanced deeper into Germany along one of Hitler's autobahns, a seamless, endless stream of German prisoners is marched the other way. By that time, one captain wrote, "The sense that with luck, one might be able to see the end of a dominant emotion." The raid had been a fiasco. Patton would never admit it, what his motive had been, but he did write down that his failure insist upon sending a full-scale combat team to Hammelburg had been the only thing he regretted during the course of the war. Otherwise, he said, my operation to me was strictly satisfactory. So Patton didn't admit that it was a total failure. He said we had a whole column of tanks we would have won. Most of the prisoners of the task force had no room and had decided to stay within combat. Too weak to strike out of their own, but some, like Tom Galloway and two of his best friends, had set across country on foot. Galloway and his friends backed away from the river without being seen and looked for shelter from the old steady rain had begun to fall upon just a little riverside town of Gurmunden. We had passed a farmhouse the night before, he recalled. 3 escapees decided it would be best just to make a way back to Hammelburg. It took them most of the day. Galloway remembered the prison camp stood on top of a long hill. Galloway and his companions didn't eat much. The same evening they were all able-bodied American prisoners, though whose escaped as well as those who stayed behind, were marched together to the railroad station and loaded in boxcars. The train ran on south towards Bavarian Alps. One prisoner remembered hearing the most terrifying sound of an American P-47 flying low close to the trains. Bullets from the 8.50 caliber machine guns fired simultaneously splintered the route of the car. The brakes shrieked and the train lurched to a stop. Guards and prisoners alike jumped down and sought cover wherever they could find it. You just tried to get away from the train, Galloway remembered. The train jerked back in a motion and continued on its way, but the doors of each boxcar were left open, this time in case of Americans came back and everyone had to jump for their lives. It rolled slowly through the ruins of Schweizerfurt, the ball-bearing center that had cost the lives of so many American flyers. 2 years later, and eventually slid to a stop at Nuremberg. It was the middle of the night. There were no lights. The men could hear air raid sirens, Allied bombers rumbling overhead. There was explosions and fires in the distance. The city had yet suffered the Allied shelling and would finally pound most of it into dust, but is already damaged by repeated bombings. Guards marched through them, blasted the streets, picking their way among the hillocks and the rumble in the dark. They had an early morning breakfast of a bread and a soup in a little park in the shadow of a vast Zeppelin field, where each summer 200,000 of the Hitler Nazi's followers had rallied to hear his enemies and describe the world the Germans would one day rule as the master race. After the guards hurried Galloway and some 25 other prisoners out of the battered city towards the south, away from the Allied armies that now seemed to be advancing everywhere in Germany. Now the Allied armies are advancing. So now we're going to continue on with chapter 12, page 315. And this chapter is titled as Passwords, Kia, and Hospital Bound.
Passport what?
Passwords, Kia, and Hospital Bound.
Yeah.
What's Kia stand for?
Kia. Spell it.
KIA, killed in action?
Spell it.
KIA.
T-I-A.
KIA. K is in kite.
T-I-A? Let me see what that is talking about.
Keep it like I have it.
What is that?
Killed in action. K, not T. Killed in action.
Minutes?
8.
Chapter 12, page 315. Passwords, Killed in Action, and Hospital Bound.
Yeah, he got hit with a stupid truck.
Oh, wow.
No, a peasant truck.
Yeah.
Peasant cart. He got ruptured, and he had a concussion. They didn't treat it, and he died. He died from the concussion.
Yeah, something else. After I heard these reports, my only thought was to get out of the area before it was too late. I did not want to spend the rest of the war in a POW stockade, or worse yet, get captured by an SS unit and get shot on the spot. So the SS primarily wouldn't take you as a prisoner. They would just kill you, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Even if you held up a white flag?
No, who?
If an American soldier held up a red flag,
They shoot him.
the SS would shoot him.
Sure, they shoot him.
So a white flag to the SS didn't mean a thing.
They nothing, yeah.
I could hear a distant small arms fire and the burst of burp guns. But what was most alarming was the absence of the sound of our own military giving support fire. There was a battle going on just south of us. A sergeant called out, "Get loaded up, we're moving out." I could hear the small arms fired, the muffled thumping of mortars as they hit, and the thunderous explosions of the 88s as they hit. It was close, too close, and we better make a move to get out of here. It was obvious that we're fighting a delaying action, but what was disconcerting to everyone was that there's no provisions for keeping an escape route. So we had no escape route.
Oh,
In this war, you had no provisions for an escape route. You just had to fight.
man,
There's no
fight,
escape.
fight to the end, yeah. Fight your way out.
We started to receive heavy Hammelburg shelling as we pulled out. Fortunately, that type of shelling was indiscriminate, even though it was highly nerve-wracking since it was so constant. Post did an excellent job of maneuvering the Jeep, the trailer along the muddy roads. Considering he was loaded down with people on the trailer as well as on the Jeep. We're heading in a westerly direction, away from the heaviest shelling and firing. A cold front came rushing in, and it began to snow and freeze the earth once again. The tanks came to life, and their engines coughing and sputtering, and they roared into the wakeful action. It was not long before the vehicles of all types were moving west over the roads and fields frozen rock hard. Several tanks got bogged down and were set afire, their crews jumping out on the other tanks and half-tracks to continue their exodus.
But who'd set them on fire?
Who would set them on fire?
The half-tracks?
It said right here, let me read it. Several tanks got bogged down and were set afire. If the tanks got bogged down, would the Americans burn their own tanks and no one else could have it?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Well, they didn't want to shoot at them.
Their crews jumping out on the other tanks and half-tracks continue the exodus. Huh?
So they would destroy the equipment.
How many men?
4.
Yeah.
In the morning light, white-clad German infantry were filtering out of the woods, following behind an artillery barrage. Before the initial attack, we were racing toward the bridge of the Sam River. We would pass through the lines of the 82nd Airborne Division and continue northwest in safety. It was a sunny, crystal day, and the air was sharp, and the surrounding landscape looked beautiful. So even though there's a hell of a war going on, the beautiful tall evergreens and the scenery was really nice.
Yeah, yeah, they didn't destroy it.
Was it all snow covered?
Huh?
Yes, was it all?
Was it all snow covered? All snow covered?
What?
The land, the trees,
Oh, yeah.
loaded
And 2
with
feet of snow.
loaded with snow. Everything looked white, clean, and peaceful. It felt good to be alive. In the distance, the hum of droning became louder. Moments later, American fighter planes roared overhead, bound for the missions in northeast fortified Goose Egg. They were headed for Bastogne. At the mid-morning, was a different war. C-47s appeared encircled. Paratroopers drifted to a snow-covered field. They were pathfinders who would guide the planes in bringing men and supplies. So now the American paratroopers are coming,
Yeah,
which is a big help.
yeah.
After a few minutes later, the fighter planes appeared. P-38 Lightnings, Air Cobras, made in the wheatfield plant.
Yeah,
So
I
they
remember the Air Cobras, yeah.
right in the wheatfield plant where you came from, where your home was. P-47 Thunderbolts and P-51 Mustangs, all honing on specific targets of opportunity. Several dozen C-47s and the German anti-aircraft threw up a wall of a flank, hitting 2 or 3 of them. The oncoming flight was never faltered. Soon there were hundreds of parachutes blossoming and drifting onto the snow-covered fields. So these paratroopers were coming in. They're basically relieving infantrymen, right?
Yeah,
Because they couldn't get them in fast enough, so they paratrooped them,
yeah.
right?
Well,
They couldn't get them in fast enough, so they dropped them through parachutes.
yeah, that was the fastest way they could do it.
The fastest way, because they need the help now. Here we are told the division would regroup in a town called Grand Manil. You remember the town called Grand Manil?
Grand Manil, yeah, Grand Manil,
That's where
yeah.
you got wounded, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's why I got shot up, yeah.
It would take several days for the logistical nightmare to be all sorted out. In the meantime, we were to take it easy the next several times. In the interim, we're once again attached to the 2nd Armor. Minutes?
30 seconds.
We were told to scrounge around for food, clothing, and ammunition. Scattered about towns were piles of clothing and ammunition and equipment, all guarded by the MPs against looters and our own soldiers who would sell them on the black market. So you mean to tell me they had guards watching?
Oh, yeah,
all your-
they looted, yeah.
What kind of people would loot?
The civilians that live there, yeah. They sell it on the black market.